for me.
Oh, excellent. Well, welcome. You're now live. It's just me and you right now. But should anybody
Okay.
be joining us, which I'm sure we'll get a few folks on here, I'm Ben Gerber. I'm with Teale Fristoe, and he is from Nothing Sacred Games. And we're going to be chatting on the Indie Talks podcast about Shadow Throne, which we're not going to get into right now because I want to save it all for the podcast, all the juicy parts. So I am going to go and spread the news. I'll include you in this on G Plus as well.
All right.
If I can spell your name right. There we go. All right, Teale. Let's do this. Let's just give me a couple seconds of silence and we'll jump into it. Welcome, folks, to Indie Talks, episode 49. I am joined tonight by Teale Fristoe of Nothing Sacred Games, and we're going to talk Shadow Throne, which looks like a really, really cool game. Currently on Kickstarter right now. Teale, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm doing great.
Excellent. Now, you're out on the West Coast, correct?
That's correct, yeah, in Oakland, California.
Excellent. Do you have a fairly decent gaming scene out there? Are there lots of folks playing games?
Yeah, I would say so. I live just a few blocks away from a really nice game store, Endgame. And then between Oakland and Berkeley, there are probably half a dozen game stores. San Francisco has a little less than you'd expect, but they're still there. And I think the game design scene is really picking up over here too. We just had our first Unpub
Oh, yeah.
about a month and a half ago. That was awesome. I'd never been to one before.
Nice.
But yeah, that was a great time. And yeah, I try to stay active, try to organize sort of mini playtesting sessions. Whenever I can. I got a pretty good group of designers that I hang out with pretty regularly. So
That's always super helpful. But I want to kind of step into the little time machine here and bring us way back on the Wayback Machine, or maybe not that far way back. What brought you to tabletop games in the first place? When did you find yourself, first pulling a chair up to the table and playing a game?
Well, so I guess the very earliest would probably be when I was, middle school, high school, playing sort of like tabletop RPGs, Hero Quest, eventually getting into the sort of Warhammer stuff. Of course, Magic. That was even back when I was in elementary school. So all those kind of things. And then I've always loved games. Once I ended up going to college, I sort of stopped doing the tabletop stuff as much. However, when I did grad school at UC Santa Cruz, which is a great place. They have an awesome game design program.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of surrounded by people who were into games all the time, and I started to get sort of back into it. And I discovered the new generation of tabletop games out there.
Excellent.
And so that's what got me back into it, and I sort of took it from there. So I actually do both digital and tabletop games.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit too.
All right.
We'll get into that because you just going on to the Nothing Sacred Games website, and by the way, your website, the Kickstarter, all of that will be in the show notes. So anybody listening to this, you can just come onto the website and click on the show notes, or even click onto them right from your wired device or wireless device of choice. But you first came out with some digital games before you got anything published in the tabletop arena.
Yeah, that's right. Shortly after college, I kind of realized that I could just, make games if I wanted to. So
Yeah.
I started making games, and it turns out releasing Flash games is a lot easier than releasing a tabletop game.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did a couple of Flash games, and right now my real focus is on tabletop games.
Hmm.
However, I have continued to do the digital stuff, and I've been moving into HTML5, so
Hmm.
developing for both web and mobile.
Excellent.
Yeah, yeah, should have my first HTML5 game coming out anytime. Actually, it's kind of ridiculous that the timing worked out to where it was during the Kickstarter, but that's just that's life. So
Now, do you find any parallels between designing a game that's going to sit on somebody's table where they're going to be physically manipulating things and designing a game where they're going to be using a mouse or their fingers to point and click? What goes into the design process for both of those?
yeah, so I mean, there's definitely some overlap.
Hmm.
I would say that one of the biggest differences for me is that the digital games that I make are single player,
Yeah.
whereas the tabletop games are multiplayer, and having another person or multiple people makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
You know, the digital game designing those tends to be all about creating an interesting AI or interesting physics system or something like that, where you're kind of it's almost more puzzle.
Hmm.
It's the player versus the computer or whatever. Whereas in for tabletop games, you really want to make it so it's players going against players. And of course, there's a lot more overlap if you're doing multiplayer computer
Right.
games
Right.
or like co-op tabletop games or something like that.
Yeah.
But I haven't really veered into that yet.
I was going to say, let's jump on a quick tangent. Have you played many co-op games where it's the players versus the board, basically, and there's a sort of a rudimentary card-powered AI?
Yeah, so I mean, I've played Pandemic, of
Mhm.
course. Everybody has played Pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And um, I think that that game really shows what you can do with AI
Yeah.
because it's super simple, and that's a big difference between digital and non-digital games. You can make a digital game as complicated as you want, and as
Hmm.
long as the player never has to know about it or see it or anything, it doesn't matter. But the player is actually doing everything in a physical game, in
Right.
a tabletop game, and I think that Pandemic strikes a really good balance between kind of an interesting and sophisticated AI, but not putting a lot of demands on the players.
Right.
So you don't need to internalize an entire tome of rules or something like that.
Sure. And there aren't too many fiddly bits for something that, as you said, can get really kind of complex as it sort of plays out. I found a lot of co-op games, some of the larger ones that involve boards, can get that way. Do you think? I mean, I've looked at designing co-op games, and I've sort of looked at what goes into putting a co-op game together. And I'll be honest with you, I can sit down at a keyboard, and if I tried to actually program an AI or program anything much more complicated than a Hello World program, I'm completely lost, out at sea, well over my head. Do you see any parallels between those two things as someone who is sort of immersed in both worlds?
Between programming an AI and
Maybe
like
designing
some.
one for a game, yeah, or even coming up with a good mechanism that is novel and hasn't really been used all that much for a multiplayer game that's not necessarily co-op. In other words,
Uh,
do you think your programming background helps you in game design?
yeah, I definitely think it does.
Hmm.
I think one of the things that I try to do a lot, and you'll see in Shadow Throne is, and this is something programmers do a lot, is you sort of define something and then you can use those things for like many different things.
Right.
So getting to my first game, Arachnophilia, this is a game where you're a spider and you create a web and
Hmm.
you're collecting bugs. And the way that it works is there's one thing that you're interacting with. Well, there's two things. There's the web and then there's the bugs.
Yeah.
And some of the bugs are good, some of the bugs are nasty, and some of the bugs are good in certain situations and nasty in other situations or whatever. But the idea is that it's all bugs. It's like you don't really have the difference between like a power up and an enemy and all that kind of
Right. Right.
stuff. And so I think that sort of being able to abstract away that kind of thing definitely lets me approach game design from a different perspective. And then another thing that I've noticed with my own designs is it tends to be very cyclical. So I mean, this is kind of the case for a lot of games, but you have one thing that you're kind of doing repeatedly, and things are sort of spiraling towards a conclusion or whatever, rather than kind of starting from the beginning and going towards the end. You almost create an update loop, which is kind of a fundamental thing of a digital game, just like a loop that's going over and over again and is updating as you go. You can kind of do that same sort of thing in a non-digital game. Just the important thing is you got to make sure that it's understandable and the people can actually do the processing without having like any major problems or something.
Sure. Now, as an aside, have you ever thought of taking that game, Spider Webs Bugs, and maybe making a small card game called It's All Bugs?
I can't say I have, but that could be interesting.
Hey, look, your first nano game right there. So, you've developed several video games. You have, I believe, 2 or 3 on your website right now that are available. And you have your HTML5 game coming out. And you're also not the new kid on the block when it comes to running Kickstarters and getting a physical board game out there as well. You also have Corporate America, which was your first Kickstarter. Yeah, let me ask you, how was that experience going into your first Kickstarter with a board game? What did you take away from that?
It was an excellent learning experience.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of background about the Kickstarter. The goal for the Kickstarter was $20,000. The game was available for $45 for people who want to play. The game is a political satire game that is basically all negotiation.
Yeah.
And back when I was actually running that Kickstarter, I didn't even realize that negotiation was like a class of tabletop games. So I didn't even know to call it a negotiation game. But it is very much a negotiation game. And I think that the Kickstarter was successful, but only barely. Like I probably raised about a third of the money that I needed in the last 2 days or something, and it was a 30-day or close to a 30-day Kickstarter.
Sure.
So most of that time was very stressful and kind of desperate, and so that. One thing that I learned there, I was in grad school at Santa Cruz. I have friends from college. I have friends from working in the game industry. So I'm like fairly well connected. And the fact that I was just barely able to scrape by with what I was going for really kind of knocked some sense into me, I guess, made me a little bit more humble. And so one of the biggest things that I've done going into Shadow Throne is make sure that the scope of the project is a little bit more manageable.
Sure.
So not only is the goal much less, it's $12,500. The game itself costs $25. And the game is, the components from the very beginning, I wanted to make sure that I was keeping a cap on the components.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to let it spiral out of control.
Right.
When I was first designing Corporate America, I thought that I was designing a pretty minimalist game that was going to be pretty small and easy and cheap, but it turns out that was not the case. It ended up being a lot more expensive than I thought, and it really taught me the value of keeping things simple and making sure that you're keeping all of those sorts of costs in mind right from the beginning. I know a lot of game designers probably, when I kind of realized that I needed to do that, it was a little bit depressing because, when it comes to theoretical game design, your imagination is the limit, right? Why not have another deck of cards, or why not have, whatever. But when it comes to actually producing games, that is not really feasible. The margins on board games are really small. It's really hard to make money off of them. And even if so. I come at this from like a self-publishing perspective, where I've been publishing my own games. I really think that even if you're not planning on publishing your own games, if you are planning on pitching your games to a publisher, it's really a good idea to keep those sorts of costs and expected price point for the game and that sort of thing in mind, because that's what the publishers are going to be thinking about. They're going to be thinking about whether it's feasible to make the game and whether they can sell the game.
Absolutely.
Even if the game is great, it's like they're not going to pick it up if they don't think that they can realistically make it. So.
Sure. Yeah, a game with an MSRP of $70 or $80 is only attractive to a certain, not very broad spectrum of fairly powered gamers, you know. So I agree with you 100% there. It's sometimes good to, you might have the most amazing game in the world, but if it's going to be in a box the size of that Ogre game that Steve Jackson weighs 35 pounds and has 6,000 components, it might be a tough sell. So tell me a little bit about Nothing Sacred Games. When you formed Nothing Sacred Games, was it mostly digital medium that you had in mind, or were you planning on branching out into physical board games when you started it?
So when I started Nothing Sacred Games, definitely the main project that I was working on was Corporate America. So I had probably been working on it for I don't know, a good 6-8 months or something at that point. So it was fairly far along. And I was still doing digital stuff, but I really wanted to make Corporate America, and I wanted to learn how to make tabletop games.
Sure.
You know, that was one of my main goals, was to sort of figure out how everything worked. So tabletop games were very much the forefront of my my plans at that point. It actually wasn't until, it's kind of funny that during the Kickstarter for Corporate America, when I didn't think that it was going to succeed, I kind of had this realization like, well, I guess I'm going to have to figure something else out now, which is when I started working on the HTML5 stuff.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's when I started picking up the digital stuff again, in earnest.
So I want to talk a little bit now about Shadow Throne. This is a game that I was completely unaware of up until about maybe a week ago. But somebody, I believe it might have been Twitter, it might have been G+, said, hey, look at this Kickstarter, this game looks pretty cool. And I said, okay, I'll look at it. And then I was immediately blown away by the art and the presentation. When somebody who knows nothing about a game first picks up a game, that's the first thing that's going to catch their eye. If they're into the medieval theme, or if they're into sort of the Game of Thrones kind of world, and they pick up a game that looks like you're going to be building a city, like, say, Suburbia, that might be an instant turnoff, depending on the company and who puts it out. So let's first talk about the artwork for Shadow Thrones. Who is doing the art, and how did they get it to look so goddamn incredible? Because it looks amazing, the things that I've seen so far.
Yeah, I'm working with some really incredible artists on the game. The main illustrator is a guy named Jesse. He's a really talented artist and graphic designer. And one of the things that I was really, I was kind of going for this sort of dark world, gritty fantasy, like definitely inspired by Game of Thrones, right? But when I started talking to him about it, one of my main goals was to sort of let him explore and find a style that worked for him, something that he wanted to do. Whenever I'm working with other people, I really want to make sure that they're excited about what they're working on, and they can take some ownership over it. And so he sort of did some trial sketches, definitely inspired by kind of pulp novels and comics, old dark comic books and everything. And he came up with this style, which is just, it really fits the tone of the game perfectly. It's I couldn't be happier about it, really.
I love the dark style. I love how it does remind me of a lot of graphic novels that are tackling some darker subjects, and that immediately drew me in. And then the hook that you put in there that got me was the card drafting, which is one of the main mechanics of the game. I'm a huge fan of card drafting. I stumbled into a game called Seasons, and that's really was my introduction to real card drafting. And as soon as I saw Shadow Throne, I was like, ooh, card drafting. Oh, okay, let's keep reading. Oh, look, backstabbing. Oh, hey, it's a political game of card drafting where you're trying to be the people behind the throne who are actually running everything. So those two things, I think, really drew me in, and I think that's going to be a real plus for this game for folks who like that dark, gritty feel. And, you know, I mean, there might be a few people out there today who've heard of Game of Thrones. I know it's not terribly popular, but that could be another sell as well. The novels are really hard to get into. I wish there was some sort of media where you could just sit and watch it, but, you know, who knows? Maybe yeah. So tell us about the gameplay. If I back this game, and then, in March, say, of 2015, it arrives on my doorstep, I'm going to rip open the box, I'm going to ogle over the art, and then I'm going to sit down and try and play it. So how does one play a game of Shadow Throne?
All right, so, well, you're going to need a couple of friends. That's going to be the first step. The game is...
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah,
when we're finished with our first game, are they still going to be friends?
I hope so, but we'll see.
Okay.
I actually tried to make it so you can't be like too terribly nasty, but somehow people find a way.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but
I'm sure my group will.
So yeah, you're gonna need a couple of friends, and then basically all you need to do is shuffle the deck and deal out some cards. The setup is really that simple.
Yeah.
And that was one of the goals for the game, to make it really quick and really easy. So the gameplay itself, the game takes place over the course of several battles. Each battle is like a hand of cards that you're playing out. So you start out by drafting, and this is a game where you're drafting hands of cards as opposed to something like Seven Wonders, where you draft a card and then immediately play it.
Yeah.
Here you're going to be drafting 6 cards, and then you're going to be choosing them to play after everybody's finished, which kind of lets you, it lets you plan, it lets you take risks, and then possibly not get horribly punished if those risks don't pay off. So after everybody's got a hand, you're going to start playing cards to influence the battle. And maybe I should back up a little bit here. Each card represents a character in the game.
Sure.
And the characters are they're members of one of 3 factions. So there's the Empire, who currently have control over what's going on, the Rebels, who are trying to overthrow them, and the Church, who's fed up with both of those guys.
Yeah.
So each character is going to be within one of those factions, and every card that you play is going to make it a little bit more likely that that faction is going to win the battle. All the playing is simultaneous. That was one of the big goals of the game, was to make it so you don't have to wait around for the other players.
Sure.
So everybody's playing these things at the same time. There's a little bit of a simple economic system in there where certain cards give you money and certain cards cost money to play. And after you've played out 4 cards, whichever faction wins the battle that has the most power out there based on the cards that the players played, you get to collect influence points for those guys. And the goal of the game is to collect influence points. So you're going to be picking up influence points if you back the right side.
Right.
And of course, you have some control over what the right side is, although the other players do as well. And after you're done with the battle, you're going to shuffle everything back up and deal again. So the persistence between battles is pretty minimal. It's your influence points, your gold, and 1 card that you save from your hand. So you'll have a little bit of an idea of what a card you'll have up your sleeve.
Sure.
Next round.
Well, that's cool. It sounds like you've kind of conquered the kingmaker problem that can sometimes arise with these games, where somebody can sort of run away with the first battle, and that makes it really hard, just to use the terms of this game, really hard to catch up over the next several steps, and there's an obvious winner even sometimes in the first 10 minutes of the game. So I like that there's not a ton of continuity throughout the battles.
Yeah, and actually, so I tried to make it so the gold actually is a little bit of a comeback mechanism, because oftentimes when you are the most successful one in the battle, you collect the most influence points, you'll have spent all of your gold. And other players are going to actually be collecting gold. There's certain cards you play hoping that they'll lose, because then you can collect a bunch of gold from them. So you're throwing them under the bus or under the chariot or whatever to to fill your pockets for the next round.
One of the video walkthroughs, the person who's doing the walkthrough referred to it as their consolation prize.
Exactly.
Consolation gold. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So how long does an average game last? 30, 45 minutes?
Yeah, 30, 45 minutes. It's usually, the average is probably 4 hands, with each hand being maybe like, I don't know, 7 to 10 minutes long. Some games only take 3, some games can take 5, but usually it's around 4. So it's really quick. Another goal of mine for this game, there's a real advantage to having shorter games because, then you can fit it in between larger or longer games, or you can just play it a bunch. You can play 2 or 3 times in a night.
Sure.
So it's a lot more flexible like that.
Yeah, I find myself being more and more drawn to the quicker games. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I have a full-time day job, I have this thing that I'm doing here as well. So I get to play board games maybe 2-3 times a month, and I want to cram as many of them in there as I can. So it's usually 1 2-hour game, and then as many other games as I can get in around that until people tell me to shut up and go to bed. So I've been kind of enjoying these quicker games that have under an hour in playtime. So I'm kind of sensing a theme between the 2 games that you're producing here, and that is politics. Did you mean to set off and make a bunch of political games, or did it just kind of happen?
I guess it just kind of happened. It's actually kind of funny because I get a lot of my inspiration from like going hiking and sort of seeing natural systems and stuff. But I guess when it came to actually multiplayer, politics is a really natural thing to incorporate in there, right?
Yeah.
You got players that are making deals and breaking deals and trying to sort of wrap their heads around some sort of complex system or whatever, and nobody has full control. So I guess that that definitely speaks to me. For corporate America, I really was going for sort of a social commentary thing.
Yeah.
This game a little bit less so. This game is more all about fun. But don't get me wrong, corporate America is a lot of fun, but you don't have that same sort of talking about what's actually going on in this country right now type thing going on.
Sure. And I mean, who doesn't enjoy a good kingdom spiraling into political turmoil and war? I mean, everybody loves that.
It's classic. Yeah, exactly. That's what you want to spend your evenings doing, right?
Damn straight. That's what I love spending my evenings doing. So I have a number of folks who listen to this podcast, and a good chunk of them are pretty hardcore, what we like to call alpha gamers. They love getting the newest games out there and exploring new concepts. But I also have a lot of folks who listen to this because they are game designers or they want to be game designers. So can we talk just for a few minutes about the design process that you go through when you're coming up with a game? Like, if we're going to take corporate America or if we're going to take Shadow Throne, what is a time frame you're looking at from the moment where you said, geez, a card game about the downfall of a kingdom and trying to back the right person would be a good idea, to, oh, geez, I just started a Kickstarter. What were you looking at there?
So for Shadow Throne, it was about a year, which is actually, I think, really short. However, it was kind of, I'd been working on other games that were somewhat similar, so I'd kind of already been exploring the mechanical space beforehand.
Sure.
And the other thing is I'm spending a lot of time doing this. This is between this and the digital games, it's pretty much my full-time job. Yeah. So I'm going to several game nights a week, testing as much as possible, going to as many local conventions as I can. Sure. So it was pretty accelerated. As far as the whole process goes, so the idea came to me over like kind of a long weekend, and I started jotting down as many notes as I could. I kind of came up with this system that I thought would be really interesting, and then I started exploring all the different characters that I could fit into the system. So I started thinking about ways to break the system, right? Make it so there's special characters that do things that they're not supposed to do or whatever. Yep. And I think this is pretty common. I think a lot of people, I know one of the main ways that I started transitioning into tabletop game design was making up Magic cards. Sure. Magic is kind of one of these open systems, and you can do anything you want in it, really. So it's really easy to come up with ideas that fit within a system. So when you're coming up with a new system, it's fun and a good idea to sort of explore what you can actually do in that system. Make sure that there's enough design space that it could actually lead somewhere. Though after I did that, I started building a prototype, which didn't take too long. I've developed some software that makes it really easy to prototype cards and then iterate over them, and so that makes it really quick to just like bust out a new game.
So when are we all going to see that?
So that it's actually it's open source, so it's available for anybody right now. It's called Nothing Sacred Cards. However, it is not pretty. It's pretty rough, and people have asked me if I would be willing to clean it up and everything, and I've kind of resisted it, mostly because that would turn into a full-time job.
Yeah, right, right.
But if anybody has questions or anything, feel free to ask. I'm happy to get people set up with it. I've got a couple of friends locally who use it now, and once you get used to the kinks and once you get past sort of the setup hurdle, it's really smooth sailing. So with this game, I was able to create prototypes and immediately start playing. And I started, at that point, the goal is not to worry about balance. The goal is not to worry about anything like that. It's just to see if the game has promise, if it can be fun. And it definitely wasn't balanced, but it was fun. It showed some promise. So after that, I started iterating on the game and trying to get tested as much as possible. One thing that I did differently with this game that I've ever done before is, I told you that I had all of these ideas for special characters and all that kind of stuff early on. Well, I eventually tore all that stuff out, and I just had numbers, and I made it so all the different sides were the same, and I tested that, and that let me sort of be confident that the game itself, the base system, was fun, and it didn't need any sort of bells and whistles. And of course, the bells and whistles make it a lot of fun. So they came back in.
Of course.
But taking that time, it proved that the game had legs on its own, and it also helped me understand a little bit better. So I understood the balance a lot better. And once I started adding those special rules back in, I had a better idea of how they fit into sort of like the bare bones version of it.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of designers, and a lot of folks have mentioned sort of the danger of either over prototyping and putting too much time and effort into designing the look and feel of the game before you have the mechanics down, or getting so lost in all the neat bells and whistles that you sort of lose track of the main game. Because it's a lot harder to tear all that stuff out after you've been using it for 6 months than it is sort of right at the beginning. So some people can work that way. It's sort of up to the individual, but lots of folks have mentioned sort of falling into that trap once or twice and then having to almost physically restrain themselves from doing all the really cool things first and just getting the game up and running.
Well, that's the exciting thing, right? It's really fun to think of all these special rules and all the crazy combos and all that kind of stuff. But it's important to not jump to the, don't set your system in stone before you've explored it, and make sure that you have a solid system to sort of build up, because that's your foundation, right? And if you start adding a bunch of stuff on top of a foundation that isn't quite sound, or, even if it's like suboptimal a little bit, the game is going to suffer for the rest of its existence for that reason.
So you have a prototype, you started playing it, and now you've talked also a little bit about sort of going out to a lot of local game nights. I imagine that provided tons of opportunity for you to play test. How did the play test going, and how critical would you say as a designer that kind of play testing is to a game's progress?
So I definitely come from the camp, I guess, that playtesting with new players is much more important than playtesting with like a set group. And so I think that they're both important. And when you playtest with a set group, one group that you play with all the time, the danger is that you're going to like balance the game for that group. And also the danger is those those people all know the game so well that they're not going to see any confusing parts or whatever, because they've already figured all that stuff out. Which is one of the reasons that I think it's really important to go to different groups, make sure that you are involved with a lot of different people, you show it to anybody who will take the time to listen to you. Because everybody who encounters a game is going to play it for the first time, but very few people are going to play it for the 10th time or anything like that. So you really need to make sure that the first time is easy to pick up, and it's fun. You don't have to sort of like suffer through 2 hours of like going back and forth between the rule book or something to make sure that everything's working. The game just needs to work. And so I think that that's one big way that going to different groups and testing benefits a game. Another thing is people have different perspectives, and the more perspectives that you can get on the game, the better the game will be. You'll get more feedback, and you'll see what things are sort of quirks of the individuals that you're talking to, and what things are going to be recurring problems or issues that will come up with everybody. So yeah, I'm very much in the you should play test with as many people as possible and play test as many first times as you can. And that's not even getting in. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there are a lot of different opinions that folks have about that. I happen to feel that you have the right opinion. The more playtesting you can do with the more people, and the more blind playtesting or people who have never seen the game before pick it up and actually start playing it, the more it's going to reveal those mistakes. That, like you said, people who know you either maybe a little bit reluctant to tell you about, or who may just gloss over it. Oh, it's just like that other thing that you showed us before. We'll just keep playing it this way instead. So I definitely think that you are in the right camp there, and I would strongly advise anybody who is looking to design games to join that camp.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that you brought up blind playtesting. That's another big thing that's really important. Is and don't wait on it. I work with a lot of game designers, and some of them are reluctant to like write the rules down because they haven't figured out the exact rules. Writing rules is really hard.
Yes, it is.
It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of iteration, and the sooner that you write the rules, the sooner that you're going to figure out how to do it, and the better that the final rules are going to be. So even if you aren't sure on the exact final version of the game, just try writing it and show it to people and see what they think. And see if they can figure out how to play it. Blind playtests are often quite painful, but those are the playtests that give you the most information and improve the game the most. So
when you get them back, I've found my sort of metric is for every 20 or so people that I'll send a blind playtest to, I'll get 3 or 4 who will play it and 1 who will actually respond back and give some useful advice other than, yeah, it was okay, or it was pretty cool. So it can be tough finding those folks to do that, particularly if you're just starting out or if you're not extremely well known in the gaming world.
Definitely, yeah. There's a lot of people are doing like print and plays and stuff right now, so there's a lot of competition for the attention of players. And yeah, I mean, those people want to play, they don't want to write reports or take notes or anything like that. So, and usually I don't even like really release it. I have a few groups of friends that I've been friends with for years, so they kind of know my style and they know the type of games I make and that kind of thing. And I'll send them games early in development. But other, random people on the internet, I try not to send them until I've gotten to the point where I've watched a few blind playtests, where I've like actually sat there and watched people struggle through the game, so I kind of know what I'm getting these random people into. So, yeah, blind playtests. It's painful, but it's important.
And I want to cycle back to the other part of game design that a lot of folks struggle with, that we both mentioned a little bit, which is writing down the goddamn rules. You know how the game is played. You know how things should work. taking those simple concepts and putting them into a document that makes sense to somebody who knows absolutely nothing about the game is quite honestly one of the hardest endeavors I think I've ever had to go through. Even for, you know, I designed a little game that has 20 cards. It's got a 2-page rule book, and it's just so hard to get it so that it all makes sense, but it's not going to, you know, make somebody turn away in disgust or sit there and stare at the book, stare at the cards. And I really liked the point of advice that you said, which is get it out as soon as you can. It doesn't have to be finished. We have these magic things called computers that allow you to edit these things on the fly. And my best friend when it comes to doing this thing is Google Docs now, because I can bring it with me, and if somebody's playing the game, they're like, well, this doesn't make sense, but if you said that, it would. I can go, you're absolutely right, and turn around and just type it right into my tablet or my laptop and just get it up. But do you have any advice for fledgling game designers out there about writing down these rules? And have you found any tips or anything that makes it easier for you, other than tackling that sort of head-on right when you start, because then you have less to do later on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that the first thing is read a lot of rules. Like when you're working on your rules, when you're starting to work on your rules, look at every game in your collection, or 20 games in your collection that you think are similar to yours or have similar time frames, similar audiences, and just see how they do it. And follow that structure. Another thing is, we were talking a little bit earlier about kind of coming from a programming background, and I think a lot of, not all game designers do, but I know a fair number do, and resist the urge to write your rule books as if it's code. Remember that you're writing something people. Put jokes in there, or put something in there to keep people's attention, and don't do it all like bullet points or something like that. Another really common thing that I think people do early on is they kind of they just list the possible interactions or something. And people are used to reading like stories. They're not used to reading to-do lists and not to-do lists or something like that. So you want to give them a story. Let them, as they're reading the rule book, set the game up with the rule book. Let them play the first round with the rule book. Make it so they don't have to jump between different pages to actually get the game going for the first time. It's hard to fit everything into a sort of like linear structure because games tend not to be linear. But do your best. Like, try to make it so people can just get going as they're reading the rule book instead of having to like reference everything as they go. And another thing that is so a couple of other things. Put diagrams in your rule book. You don't have to do that for the first draft, but you should do it eventually. Put pictures and put examples in your rule book. Some people learn from examples much better than they learn from just like the law, So help those people out. Give them something where if they come up to a problem or something, have an example in there so they can follow it. And that's especially true for sort of like edge cases and places where the rules kind of break down or aren't totally intuitive. Just try to have as few like appendices and that kind of thing as possible. Try to get everything in there. Make it so when the player is going to need it, that's where they're going to be in the rules.
I think it's kind of a new thing, and I don't really understand why it's taken us as a hobby so long to get there. But you mentioned sitting down where the first part of the rules will take you through sort of a round of the game. And I love board games, especially the more complicated ones, where they'll basically say, all right, we're going to play the first round of the game using the rules. And maybe that's come about because things like tablets have come up where they're literally taking you through the game in a tutorial or something, but I've seen that happening more and more with newer games that are coming out, and I really like that because rather than sitting down, reading a rule book, and then setting up the game, and then trying to play it and referencing the rule book again, as you said, you open up the rule book, you set up the game, and you just walk through that first step. And you can even do it alone. You don't need another player with you, and then you can teach that person how to do it. And I also like your, definitely like your advice of reading as many rule books as you possibly can. I kind of cheated when it comes to that because I have this group on Google+. I run the board game community, and there's like 10,000 of us. So I went on there one day and I posted, what are the worst rule books out there? And then the next day I said, hey, what are the best rule books out there? And then I went through my collection. I said, well, these are 3 of the worst. Those 3 are the best. I'm going to read these and see why people keep saying this is a really bad one or this is a really good one. But there's nothing stopping you or anybody listening to this from doing that as well. Go on to Board Game Geek or Reddit or what have you and find a whole bunch of people that love board games and say, what rules suck? And you'll get a lot of responses. And then say, what rules are really great? And you'll get fewer responses. But it gives you a good thing to pick from and see who does a good job. And I also tend to cheat a little bit as well. Before I get to the print and play stage, I have a buddy of mine who gives me a really good rate, and he's a professional game editor. So
Wow.
I have him go
Good
through and do a first pass. Absolutely, yeah. So Jim, thank you for what you've done, because you've made my life a lot easier as well. Okay, I want to cycle back to the Kickstarter now, and I want to hit on another aspect of this Kickstarter that I really like, is that if you wanted to back this, you do not have 72.5 different backer levels, some of which give you a different colored box, and others which will give you 3 extra cards. But if you want to do them both, you have to do this third thing. You made it really simple. You want to just keep an eye on what's going on, pledge a buck. You want the print and play files with all the finished artwork, it's $5. You want to buy the game, you're in the US, $25 ship. Boom. Easy as that. And then there are some other levels above that that are for people who want more product or for retailers or what have you. Did you do that with your first Kickstarter as well, or is that something that you've started doing here with Shadow Throne?
I sure did not do that for the first Kickstarter. That was one of the lessons that I learned from the first Kickstarter, actually. So for the first Kickstarter, it started out more complicated than Shadow Throne did, where part of the fun of corporate America is you get to become president, and the president gets to wear a silly hat. So I had silly hats that people could buy, and then I also had like handmade prototypes that people could have, and so I had all these different levels. And then as the Kickstarter was kind of struggling along, I decided, well, you know, this may not work out, but I'm gonna have some fun with it. So then I started adding new levels for people to put their, you know, faces in the art. So in the game there's protests, and you could choose which protest you wanted to be. So you could be in one of those, or, you know, the game makes fun of a lot of businesses. So I said, okay, there's these business names that I'm like not terribly happy with. You can help me come up with a different name that's going to make fun of this type of business or whatever. So I probably ended up with like, I don't know, 30 or 40 different rewards for all these different things. And for corporate America, it worked out okay, but it definitely was kind of a nightmare from a logistics perspective, because I had to, you know, I had to deal with all of these different people who had all these different, you know, they expected different things. And just communicating with these people. A lot of them, some people didn't even really know what they were getting when they signed up for these different rewards and stuff. So for Shadow Throne, I really wanted to simplify things, and I wanted to keep it sort of minimalist. Kind of going back to the, you know, component count for the game. You know, I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to keep it basic. I wanted to make sure that the scope didn't creep to be too big. And so far, it's worked out pretty well. I have had a number of people that have wanted something a little bit bigger. So they've wanted something, you know, people who want to support me want to like give a lot of money to the campaign, and there's no obvious way of doing that. And I think that's the one thing that I neglected. You know, having some sort of, you know, art print or, I don't know, some other like sort of luxury item to get with the game or something, that probably would have been good to do in advance. But you know, my hope was that the game could stand on its own, and so far it seems like it's going to be able to. It's not quite there yet, but it's on track to be there. As
of now, you're what, almost $8,000 out of your $12,500 goal. So you're 60-ish% of the way there, a little bit over that. But having been somebody who's looked at a ton of Kickstarters and talked to a ton of Kickstarter creators and backers, I'll give my normal disclaimer here, which I am not psychic. I cannot raise your hand, nor can I force any of my listeners into actually going out and backing this psychically. However, I'm going to predict that this Kickstarter will fund, and I'm also going to predict that at the least you're going to get to your first stretch goal, which is a higher quality cards, which is not that far up above your goal. I mean, $12,500 you're funded, $15,000 we get the deluxe cards. So that is going to be my prediction, at least up to the deluxe cards.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. You know, that's what I'm hoping for. There's the expansion at the $20,000 level. That is a little bit more tenuous at this point.
Yeah.
That would be awesome, but you know, you can't have it all, right? So.
Right.
So yeah, I think that the reward tiers, they seem to be doing the trick. You know, they seem to be giving people what they want. And actually, I wasn't even. One of the reward tiers is a copy of Shadow Throne and a copy of Corporate America.
Yeah, $60. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't even planning on doing that originally, but I'm really glad that I ended up doing that. I think a lot of people just have never heard of Corporate America. It's still pretty obscure, and you know, this is a good deal, a good way of getting it.
Absolutely.
And so if you're interested in both games, yeah, it's worked out pretty well so far.
Yeah, and it speaks, I think, a bit about Corporate America as well, where Dan King from the Dice Tower did the preview of the game, and the first thing he said in the preview is, and this is the same guy that did Corporate America, which is one of my favorite negotiation games. So when you have somebody from the Dice Tower Network saying that, that I think speaks volumes about the game as well. And you know, it's a good reason to go out and spend $60, and that includes shipping as well.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes, that's quite a discount. You spend $60, you get both games.
Yeah. It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have covered just about everything I want to cover on today's Indie Talks. This is going to go live Monday the 16th, which will still give folks almost 2 weeks, about 11, 12 days to back the Kickstarter. Everybody will be back from Origins by then, so they'll be paying attention to new games, which means that if you're listening to this podcast and the After Origins glow is starting to wear off and you want to experience it again, I highly recommend backing Shadow Throne. $25 gets you what looks to be an amazing game. There's plenty of run-throughs on the site to look at, and there's some reviews up here as well. And thank you, Teale, for actually explaining how the game works on the podcast as well. So before we bring this podcast to a close, absolutely, where can folks find you online?
So Nothing Sacred Games is where I blog. There's contact information for me there and everything. And yeah, that's probably the best place to go. So you can email me. I've written, you know, a lot of the stuff that we've covered today, differences between digital and non-digital games, sort of learning from tutorials to write board game rules, all this kind of stuff I talk about. I'm always happy to, you know, if somebody has a question on the design side or on the publishing side, you know, I love talking about this stuff.
Excellent.
So anytime.
Good. All right, just two more quick points that I want to hit. First one is, it's all bugs. I'm telling you, gold right there, perfect game. I also have one question that I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, and I always save this one for last. And for me, when you sit down to play a tabletop game, it's absolutely a social thing. I've enjoyed and played a few solitaire games, but really the joy of playing games is interacting with other people, seeing how they're going to handle the same problems that you're trying to tackle, and having a good time. Occasionally Monty Python quotes, you know, that's optional. But when I am in a social setting, it's not really a social setting as far as I'm concerned, unless there is some kind of food or beverage involved. So, Teale, when you sit down to play games with friends, what is your ideal gaming snack or drink?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I'd probably like to have a beer with my game. Exactly what type probably depends on where I am and who I'm with. But I think that, you know, that you know, another thing is probably popcorn, which comes from a bar up in Berkeley called the Albatross, which has free popcorn for people, and I've had a lot of fun. Actually, the guys that are working on Shadow Throne with me, we used to go up there and do role-playing games every other week, and have a lot of good memories from that. So I think beer and popcorn is going to be my answer.
Excellent. Hey, you know, I'm behind that 100%. I love a good beer, and I never think to make popcorn, but if somebody else makes it and puts it in front of me, damned if I don't eat the whole bowl. So I'm absolutely with you there. Teale, thanks so much for coming on Indie Talks. It was a pleasure to have you on here. Folks, head over to Kickstarter. Look for Shadow Throne. Looks like an amazing game. Go ahead and back it. $25 buys you into the game. $60, get Corporate America and Shadow Thrones. Teale, have a great night.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Take care.